Hello, my mic was muted. I've been talking. I'm sure you could see me bouncing. As I like to blame it on the heat when I do things like this. It's melting my brain and it's coming out of my ears. It's the only explanation I have for why it's like this, I'm afraid. But I did manage to get chat situated and I have my little rolly guys off to the side. Hooray. Everything is functional now. I believe also my music widget should be, there it is. Because, we're here for a good, comfy time. And does the music sound alright? Okay, cool. I have both it and the Spotify app and then the desktop audio equalizers going at the same time. I'm kind of quiet. I am also speaking in my lower registers. That's probably why. I can turn myself up just a little though. That's okay. I kind of want to be quiet for something like this. Just checking. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Well, is everyone doing okay in the heat, I hope? I hope. It's been so hot lately. It's a miracle I can get anything done, to be quite frank with you. I don't like it when it's this hot. I suffer. You don't want to talk about the heat? You know what, that's understandable. I have made the joke at work a couple times. This is the last thing about the heat I will touch on is I have said that God had to nerf me so he made me heat intolerant. Otherwise I would be able to knock him off the throne in about 15 minutes. It's the only thing he's got going for him. I'm really sorry that you're having such a rough go of it. The heat is no joke, and the fact that you have no AC is making it way worse. But I hope you're able to have that cool shower. I hope you're able to cool down just a little. Is there any word on your aircon getting fixed, by the way? Like any word at all? Oh, I wish I could be able to be like, here, have some of my AC. Because, bro, that sucks. Absolutely terrible. Someone over, but he messed with it, then left. So he didn't actually fix anything. He just kind of took it apart and was like, yeah, no, this is a problem, and then left. And nothing working, so nothing was fixed. He just sort of, not quite wasted everyone's time, because I mean, you had to look at it to ascertain the problem, but do you know when he's coming back? I hope you know when he's coming back, because I'm hoping the next time he comes back it's fixed. No? Oh. That's miserable. I am so sorry. Well, the, all I he just dipped. Okay, that's That's kind of weird. He just like opened it up, messed with it, and then left. Didn't even say to you guys anything about what the problem would be. He was just like, "Oh yeah, that's broken," and then left. Hmm. Hmm. That's I don't like that. That's some sus behavior. Well, if there is something I can do to lessen some of it, please, I will do what I can. I live in a weird area. Did you look up the company before you hired them? I assume you did. I assume. You didn't pick? Okay. So you're just sort of like stuck with it. Oh, that's even worse. Oh. Oh, the property manager. Oh, so the property manager probably just picked whoever was going to be the cheapest to fix it. Oh, that's even worse. Oh, gross. I offer you my condolences and hopefully he comes back in like tomorrow or the day after and like fixes your problem because it's not healthy to be stuck in this heat like at all. Oh, huh. Yeah, that makes me nervous. That makes me incredibly nervous. Okay. I don't wish to cut this conversation short, but what say that we move on to slightly comfier things. Let's move on to something a little more cheerful, shall we? All right. So, oh, excuse me. Oof, there is a demon in my throat causing coughs. All right, and I do have a cup of water, so no one can get mad at me for not drinking. So, to pick up where we left off, oh, we only made it about 54 pages last time. That's not too bad, though. I may turn the music down slightly for me. There we go. That's probably just a little better. Okay. Are we ready? Everyone comfortable? Have their drinks? Target practice. London, December 1884. The dartboard hangs precariously on a wall in the study, between tall bookcases and ornately framed oil paintings. It is almost camouflaged in the shadows, despite its bold pattern, but the knife reaches its target each and every time it is thrown, very near the bullseye that is obscured by the newspaper clipping pinned to the board. The clipping is a theatrical review, an article carefully removed from the London Times. It is a positive review. Some might call it glowing. Nevertheless, it has been put in this position of execution, and the silver-handled knife is being thrown at it. The knife slices through the paper and sinks into the cork of the dartboard. It is retrieved and removed only to have the process repeated again. The knife is being thrown gracefully from the handle so that it rotates over and over perfectly until the blade finds its mark by Chandras Christophe Lefebvre, whose name is printed in clear typeset letters in the last line of the aforementioned newspaper clipping. The sentence that holds his name is the particular one that has incensed Monsieur Lefebvre to the point of knife throwing. A single sentence that reads thusly: Monsieur Charles Christophe Lefebvre continues to push the boundaries of the modern stage, dazzling his audience with spectacle that is almost transcendent. Most theatrical producers would likely be flattered by such a remark. They would clip the article for a scrapbook of reviews, quote it for references and referrals. But not this particular theatrical producer. No. Monsieur Chandras Christophe Lefebvre instead focuses on that penultimate word. Almost. Almost. The knife flies again across the room, over furniture of velvet and intricately carved wood, passing perilously close to a crystal decanter of brandy. It somersaults swiftly, handle over blade, and finds itself buried in the dartboard once again. This time it pierces the now nearly shredded paper in between the words audiences and spectacle, obscuring the width completely. Chandrash follows in the wake of the knife, pulling the blade from the board carefully, though with a fair amount of force. He walks back across the room, knife in one hand, a glass of brandy in the other, and turns swiftly on his heel, letting the knife fly once more, aiming for that horrible word. Almost. Clearly, he must be doing something wrong. If his productions are merely almost transcendent, where the possibility of true transcendence exists somewhere nearby, waiting to be attained, then there is something else that must be done. He has been pondering this ever since the review was placed on his desk, neatly clipped and labeled by his assistant. Additional copies have been filed elsewhere for posterity and safekeeping, and the desk copies often meet such gruesome fates while Chandrash agonizes over every word. Chandrash relishes reactions, genuine reactions, not mere polite applause. He often values the reactions over the show itself. A show without an audience is nothing, after all. In the response of the audience, that is where the power of performance lives. He was raised in the theater, sitting in boxes at the ballet. Being a restless child, he quickly grew bored with the familiarity of the dances and chose instead to watch the audiences, to see where they smiled and gasped, where the women sighed and the men began to nod off. So perhaps it is not terribly surprising that now, many years later, he still has more interest in the audience than the performance itself, though the performance must be spectacular in order to coerce the best reactions. And because he is incapable of observing the faces of every audience member at the performance of every show, shows that range from compelling drama to exotic dancing girls, and a few that creatively combine the two, he relies on the reviews. Though there has not been a review in some time that vexes him the way this particular one does, and certainly not one in years that provoked knife throwing. The knife flies again, this time piercing the word stage. Chandrash goes to retreat, sipping his brandy on the way. He regards the nearly decimated article curiously for a moment, peering at the almost illegible words. Then he bellows for Marco. Darkness and stars. With your ticket in hand, you follow a continuous line of patrons into the circus, watching the rhythmic motion of the black and white clock as you wait. Beyond the ticket booth, the only way forward is through a heavy striped curtain. One by one, each person passes through it, vanishing from sight. When it is your turn, you pull back the fabric and step forward, only to be engulfed by darkness as the curtain closes again. It takes your eyes a few moments to adjust, and then tiny dots of light begin appearing, like stars, lining the dark walls in front of you. And while moments before you were so close to your fellow circus goers that you could have touched them, now you are alone as you feel your way tentatively forward through a maze-like tunnel. The tunnel twists and turns, the tiny light providing the only illumination. You have no way of discerning how far you've gone or which direction you are moving in. Finally, you reach another curtain, fabric that feels as soft as velvet beneath your hands, parts easily when you touch it. The light on the other side is blinding. Truth or Dare? Concord, Massachusetts, September 1897. They sit in the oak tree in the afternoon sun, the five of them. His sister Caroline on the highest branch, because she always climbs the highest. Her best friend Millie perches below. The Mackenzie brothers throwing acorns at the squirrels. are somewhat lower than that, but not low enough to be considered anything but high. He is always on the low branches. Not for fear of heights, but for where he ranks in the group, when he is even allowed to be a part of it. Being Caroline's younger brother is both a blessing and a curse that way. Bailey is sometimes allowed to join them, but always kept in his place. Truth or dare, Caroline calls from the upper branches. She receives no reply, so she drops an acorn directly on her brother's head. Truth or dare, Bailey, she repeats. Bailey rubs his head through his hat. Maybe the acorn made him choose the way he does. Truth is a resigned response, a yielding to Caroline's abusive, nut-throwing version of the game. Dare is marginally more defiant. Even if he is humoring her, at least he isn't a coward. It seems like the right thing to say, and he feels rather proud of himself when it takes Caroline a moment to respond. She sits on her branch some 15 feet above him, swinging her leg and looking off over the field while she formulates the dare. The Mackenzie brothers continue to torment the squirrels. Then, Caroline smiles and clears her throat to make her proclamation. Bailey's dare, she starts, making it his own and no one else's, binding him to it. He begins to feel uneasy before she even says what the dare actually consists of. She pauses dramatically before declaring, Bailey's dare is to break into the night circus. Millie gasps. The Mackenzie brothers stop their acorn throwing and look up at her, the squirrels abruptly forgotten. A huge smile spreads across Caroline's face as she stares down at Bailey. And bring back something as proof, she adds, unable to keep the hint of triumph out of her voice. It is an impossible dare, and all of them know it. Bailey looks out across the field to where the circus tents sit like mountains in the middle of the valley. It is so still in the daytime, with no lights and no music and no crowds of people. Just a bunch of striped tents, looking more yellow and gray than black and white in the afternoon sun. It looks odd, and perhaps a bit mysterious, but not extraordinary. Not in the middle of the day. And not terribly scary, Bailey thinks. I'll do it, he says. He jumps down from his low branch and starts across the field, not waiting to hear their replies, not wanting Caroline to retract the dare. He is certain she expected him to say no. An acorn whizzes by his ear, but nothing else. And for reasons Bailey cannot quite put words to, he is walking toward the circus with a considerable amount of determination. It looks just as it did the first time he saw it, when he was not quite 6 years old. It materialized in the same spot then, and now it looks like it never left, as though it were merely invisible for the 5-year period where the field sat empty. At the age of not quite 6, he was not allowed to visit the circus. His parents deemed him too young, so he could only stare from afar, enchanted, at the tents and the lights. He had hoped it would stay long enough for him to age properly into old enough, but it vanished without notice after 2 weeks, leaving too young Bailey heartbroken. But now, it has returned. It arrived only a few days ago and is still a novelty. Had it been present for longer, Caroline likely would have chosen a different dare. But the circus is currently the talk of the town, and Caroline likes to keep her dares en vogue. The night before had been Bailey's first proper introduction to the circus. It was like nothing he had ever seen. The lights, the costumes, it was all so different. As though he had escaped his everyday life and wandered into another world. He had expected it to be a show, something to sit in a chair and watch. He realized quickly how wrong he was. It was something to be explored. He investigated it as best he could, though he felt woefully unprepared. He did not know what tents to choose out of dozens of options, each with tantalizing signs hinting at the contents. And every turn he took through the twisting, striped pathways led to more tents, more signs, more mysteries. He found a tent full of acrobats and stayed amongst them as they twirled and spun until his neck ached from staring up. He wandered through a tent full of mirrors and saw hundreds and thousands of Baileys staring, wide-eyed, back at him, each in matching gray caps. Even the food was amazing. Apples dipped in caramel so dark they appeared almost blackened, but remained light and crisp and sweet. Chocolate bats with impossibly delicate wings. The most delicious cider Bailey had ever tasted. Everything was magical, and it seemed to go on forever. None of the pathways ended. They curved into others or circled back to the courtyard. He could not properly describe it afterwards. He could only nod when his mother asked if he had enjoyed himself. They did not stay as long as he would have liked. Bailey would have stayed all night if his parents had let him. There were still so many more tents to explore. But he was ushered home to bed after only a few hours, consoled with promises that he could go back next weekend, though he anxiously recalls how quickly it disappeared before. He ached to go back almost the moment he walked away. He wonders if he accepted the dare, in part, to return to the circus sooner. It takes Bailey the better part of 10 minutes to walk all the way across the field, and the closer he gets, the larger and more intimidating the tents look, and the more his conviction fades. He is already trying to come up with something he can use as proof without having to go in when he reaches the gates. The gates are easily 3 times his height. The letters atop its spelling, Le Cirque des Rêves, are almost indiscernible in the daylight, each one perhaps the size of a rather large pumpkin. The curls of iron around the letters do remind him of pumpkin vines. There is a complicated-looking lock holding the gates shut, and a small sign that reads, "Gates open at nightfall and close at dawn," in swirly lettering, and under that, in tiny plain letters, "Trespassers will be exsanguinated." Bailey doesn't know what exsanguinated means, but he doesn't much like the sound of it. The circus feels strange in the daytime, too quiet. There is no music, no noise, just the calls of nearby birds and the rustling of the leaves in the trees. There doesn't even appear to be anyone there, as though the whole place is deserted. It smells like it does at night, but fainter, of caramel and popcorn and smoke from the bonfire. Bailey looks back across the field. The others are still in the tree, though they look tiny from so far away. They are undoubtedly watching, so he decides to walk around to the other side of the fence. He is no longer entirely certain he wants to do this, and if and when he does, he doesn't particularly want to be watched. Most of the fence past the gates borders the edge of the tents, so there really isn't anywhere to enter. Bailey keeps walking. A few minutes after he loses sight of the oak tree, he finds a part in the fence that is not right up against a tent, but borders a small passageway, like an alley between them, wrapping around the side of one tent and disappearing around a corner. It's as good a place as any to try to get in. Bailey finds that he does, actually, want to go inside. Not because of the dare, but because he is curious. Dreadfully, hopefully curious. And beyond proving himself to Caroline and her gang, beneath the curiosity, there is that need to return, tugging at him. The iron bars are thick and smooth, and Bailey knows without trying that he will not be able to climb over. Besides the fact that there are no good footholds past the first few feet, the top of the fence curls outward into swirls that are something like spikes. They are not overly intimidating, but they are definitely not welcoming. But the fence was apparently not built with the express purpose of keeping 10-year-old boys out, for while the bars are solid, they are spread almost a foot apart, and Bailey, being somewhat small, can squeeze through comparatively easily. He does hesitate, just for a moment, but he knows he will hate himself later if he doesn't at least try, no matter what might happen afterwards. He thought it would feel different, the way it had at night, but as he pulls himself through the fence and stands in the passage between the tents, he feels exactly as he had on the outside. As if the magic is still there in the daytime, he cannot feel it. And it seems to be completely abandoned, with no sign of any workers or performers. It is quieter on the inside. He cannot hear the birds. The leaves that rustled around his feet on the outside have not followed him past the fence, although there is room enough for the breeze to carry them through the bars. Bailey wonders which way he should go, and what might count as proof for his dare. There doesn't seem to be anything to take, only bare ground and the smooth striped sides of the tents. The tents look surprisingly old and worn in the light, and he wonders how long the circus has been traveling, and where it goes when it leaves. He thinks there must be a circus train, though there is not one at the nearest station, and as far as he can tell, no one ever sees such a train come or go. Bailey turns right at the end of the passage and finds himself in a row of tents, each one with a door and a sign advertising its contents. Flights of Fancy reads one, Ethereal Enigmas another. Bailey holds his breath as he passes the one marked Fearsome Beasts and Strange Creatures, but he hears nothing from inside. He finds nothing to take with him, as he is unwilling to steal a sign, and the only other things out in plain sight are scraps of paper and the occasional smushed piece of popcorn. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across the tents, stretching over the dry ground. The ground has been painted or powdered white in some areas, black in others. Bailey can see the brown dirt beneath that has been kicked up by so many feet walking over it. He wonders if they repaint it every night as he turns another corner, and because he is looking at the ground, he nearly runs into the girl. She is standing in the middle of the path between the tents, just standing there, as though she is waiting for him. She looks to be about his own age, and she wears what can only be called a costume, as they certainly aren't normal clothes. White boots with lots of buttons, white stockings, and a white dress made from bits of every fabric imaginable, scraps of lace and silk and cotton all combined into one, with a short white military jacket over it, and white gloves. Every inch from her neck down is covered in white, which makes her red hair exceptionally shocking. "You're not supposed to be here," the red-haired girl says quietly. She does not sound upset, or even surprised. Bailey blinks at her a few times before he manages to respond. I, uh, I know, he says, and it sounds to him like the stupidest thing in the world to say. But the girl only looks at him. I'm sorry? He adds, which sounds even stupider. "You should probably leave before anyone else sees you," the girl says, glancing over her shoulder, but Bailey cannot tell what she is looking for. "What way did you come in?" "Back, Bailey turns around but cannot tell which way he came. The path turns in on itself, and he cannot see any of the signs to know which one he had passed. "I'm not sure," he says. "That's all right. Come with me." The girl takes his hand in her white-gloved one and pulls him down one of the passageways. She does not say anything more as they walk through the tent, although she makes him stop when they reach a corner and they do not move for almost a minute. When he opens his mouth to ask what they are waiting for, she simply holds a finger over her lips to quiet him, and then continues walking a few seconds later. You can fit through the fence? The girl asks, and Bailey nods. The girl takes a sharp turn behind one of the tents, down a passageway Bailey had not even noticed. And there is the fence again, and the field outside. Go this way, the girl says. You should be fine. She helps Bailey squeeze through the bars, which are a bit tighter in this part of the fence. When he is on the other side, he turns around to face her. Thank you, he says. He cannot think of anything else to say. You're welcome, the girl says, but you should be more careful. You're not supposed to come in here during the day. It's trespassing. I know, I'm sorry, Bailey says. What does exsanguinated mean? The girl smiles. It means draining all your blood, she says. But they don't actually do that, I don't think. She turns and starts back down the passageway. Wait, Bailey says, though he doesn't know what he's asking her to wait for. The girl returns to the fence. She does not respond, just waits to hear what he has to say. I'm supposed to bring something back, he says, and regrets it instantly. The girl's brow furrows as she stares at him through the bars. Bring something back? She repeats. Yeah, Bailey says, looking down at his scuffed brown shoes and at her white boots on the other side of the fence. It was a dare, he adds, hoping she will understand. The girl smiles. She bites her lip for a second and looks thoughtful, and then she pulls off one of her white gloves and hands it to him through the bars. Bailey hesitates. It's okay, take it, she says. I have a whole box of them. Bailey takes the white glove from her and puts it in his pocket. Thank you, he says. You're welcome, Bailey, the girl says, and this time, when she turns away, he does not say anything, and she disappears behind the corner of the striped tent. Bailey stands there for a long while before he walks back across the field. There is no one left in the oak tree, and when he reaches it, only a great deal of acorns is on the ground, and the sun is starting to set. He is halfway home when he realizes he never told the girl his name. You'll have to permit the clinking. I am taking drinks in between. Associates and Conspirators, London, February 1885. Midnight dinners are a tradition at La Maison Lefebvre. They were originally concocted by Chandrish on a whim, brought about by a combination of chronic insomnia and keeping theatrical hours, along with an innate dislike of proper dinner party etiquette. There are places to get a meal after hours, but none of these places particularly suit Chandrish's tastes. So, he began throwing elaborate multi-course dinners, with the first course to be served at midnight. Always precisely at midnight, at the moment the grandfather clock in the foyer begins to chime. The first plates are placed on the table. Chandrish feels it adds a sense of ceremony. The earliest midnight dinners were small, intimate gatherings of friends and colleagues. Over time, they have become more frequent and more extravagant, eventually turning into something of an underground sensation. An invitation to a midnight dinner is coveted in certain circles. They are selective, these dinners. Though occasionally there may be as many as 30 people, there are often as few as 5. 12 to 15 guests is somewhat standard. The cuisine is excellent regardless of the number of guests. Chandrish never provides menus for these events. Some similar dinners, if there were dinners that could be considered similar, might have calligraphed menus on sturdy paper describing each course in great detail, or perhaps just listing an intriguing title or name. But midnight dinners have an air of nocturnal mystery already, and Chandra's finds that providing no menu, no map of the culinary route, adds to the experience. Dish after dish is brought to the table, some easily identifiable as quail or rabbit or lamb, served on banana leaves or baked in apples or garnished with brandy-soaked cherries. Other courses are more enigmatic, concealed in sweet sauces or spiced soups, unidentifiable meats hidden in pastries and glazes. Should a diner inquire as to the nature of a particular dish, question the origin of a bite or a seasoning, a flavor she cannot put her finger on, for even those with the most refined of palates can never identify each and every flavor, she will not be met with a satisfying answer. Chandrash will remark that, quote, the recipes belong to the chefs themselves, and I am not one to deny them their privacy. The curious guest will return to the mysterious plate in front of her, perhaps remarking that, whatever the secrets, the dish is quite impressive, and continuing to wonder where the particular flavor might originate, as she savors each bite with profound thoughtfulness. Conversation at these dinners is largely reserved for the time between courses. In truth, Chandrash prefers not to know all the ingredients, not to understand each technique. He claims such ignorance gives each dish life, makes it more than the sum of its parts. Ah, remarked one guest when the topic arose, you prefer not to see the gears of the clock, as to better tell the time. The desserts are always astonishing. Confections deliriously executed in chocolate and butterscotch, berries bursting with creams and liqueurs, cakes layered to impossible heights, pastries lighter than air, figs that drip with honey, sugar blown into curls and flowers. Often diners remark that they are too pretty, too impressive to eat, but they always find a way to manage. Chandrash never reveals the identity of his chefs. One rumor supposes he has culinary geniuses from around the world kidnapped and imprisoned in his kitchens, where they are forced by questionable means to cater to his every whim. Another implies that the food is not cooked on the premises, and instead is imported from the best restaurants in London, paid extra to stay open for the late hour. This rumor often results in debates on methods of keeping hot food hot and cold food cold, which never comes to any satisfying conclusion and tends to make its debaters rather hungry. Regardless of its origin, the food is always delectable. The decor in the dining room, or rooms depending on the size of the event, is as extraordinary as it is in the rest of the house. From sumptuous reds and golds with art and artifacts from across the globe displayed on every available surface. Everything is lit with glowing chandeliers and copious candles, so that the light is not bright, but deep and warm and bubbling. There is often entertainment of some sort or another. Dancers, conjurers, exotic musicians. The more intimate gatherings are typically accompanied by Chandrash's personal pianist, a beautiful young woman who plays continuously through the entire evening and never speaks a word to anyone. There are dinner parties. They are dinner parties like any other, though the ambiance and the late hour makes them something else, something unusual and curious. Chandrash has an inherent flair for the unusual and the curious. He understands the power of atmosphere. On this particular night, the midnight dinner is a comparatively intimate one, with only 5 invited guests. And tonight's dinner is not merely a social gathering. The first to arrive, after the pianist, already playing, is Madame Anna Padva, a retired Romanian prima ballerina. who has been dear friends with Chandrash's mother. He called her Tante Padva as a child, and continues to do so to this day. She is a stately woman, the grace of a dancer still visible through her advanced age, along with her impeccable sense of style. Her sense of style is the primary reason she is invited this evening. She is a fiend for aesthetics, with an eye for fashion that is both unique and coveted, and provides her with a sizable income since her retirement from the ballet. The woman is a magician with clothing, the papers say, a miracle worker. Madame Padva dismisses these comments, though she does joke that with enough silk and an industrial strength corset, she could make Chandrash himself pass for the most fashionable of ladies. On this evening, Madame Padma wears a dress of black silk, hand-embroidered with intricate patterns of cherry blossoms, something like a kimono reincarnated as a gown. Her silver hair is piled atop her head and held in place with a small jeweled black cage. A choker of perfectly cut scarlet rubies circles her neck, putting forth a vague impression of her throat having been slit. The overall effect is slightly morbid and incredibly elegant. Mr. Ethan W. Barris is an engineer and architect of some renown, and the second of the guests to arrive. He looks as though he wandered into the wrong building, and would be more at home in an office or a bank with his timid manner and silver spectacles, his hair carefully combed to disguise the fact it is beginning to thin. He met Chandrash only once before, at a symposium on ancient Greek architecture. The dinner invitation came as a surprise. Mr. Barris is not the type of man who receives invitations to unusual late-night social functions, or usual social functions for that matter, but is deemed too impolite to decline. Besides, he has long since desired a peek inside the Lefebvre townhouse, which is something of a legend amongst his colleagues who work in interior design. Within moments of his arrival, he finds himself with a glass of sparkling wine in hand, exchanging pleasantries with a former prima ballerina. He decides then that he rather enjoys unusual late-night social functions and should endeavor to attend them more frequently. The Burgess sisters arrive together. Tara and Lainey do a little bit of everything. Sometimes dancers, sometimes actresses. Once they were librarians, though that is a subject they will only discuss if heavily intoxicated. They have, of late, made something of a business of consulting on any matter. They offer advice on subjects ranging from relationships to finances to travel and shoes. Their secret, which they will also discuss if properly intoxicated, is their highly developed skill of observation. They see every detail, notice the tiniest nuances. And if ever Tara were to miss something, Lainey would catch her oversight, and vice versa. They find they enjoy resolving other people's issues via suggestion more than doing all the work themselves. It is more satisfying, they say. They look similar. Both have the same waves of chestnut hair and large, bright hazel eyes that make them appear younger than they actually are. Not that either will admit their age or disclose which one of them is older. They wear fashionable gowns that do not match exactly, but coordinate beautifully, one complementing the other. Madame Padva greets them with the practiced disinterest she reserves for pretty young things, but warms when they enthusiastically compliment her hair and jewels and dress. Mr. Barris finds himself somewhat smitten with both of them, though it might be the wine. He has a fair amount of difficulty understanding their heavy Scottish accents, if they are Scottish at all. He is not entirely sure. The last guest arrives shortly before dinner, just as the rest of the guests are being seated and the wine is being poured. He is a tall man of indeterminate age with indistinct features. He wears a spotless gray suit with tails and gives his top hat and cane at the door, and a card with the name Mr. A.H. He nods politely at the other guests as he sits, but says nothing. Chandris joins them at this point, followed closely by his assistant Marco, a handsome young man with striking green eyes who quickly attracts the attention of both Burgess sisters. I have invited you all here for a reason, Chandra says, as I'm sure you have surmised by now. However, it is a business matter, and I find those to be best discussed on a full stomach, so we shall save the official discourse for after dessert. He waves vaguely at one of the waiters, and as the clock in the hall begins to chime, a low, heavy sound that reverberates throughout the house 12 times, the first course is brought out. The conversation is as pleasant and flowing as the wine over the subsequent courses. The ladies are more talkative than the men. In fact, the man in the gray suit barely says a word. And though few of them have met before, by the time the play principal are cleared, an observer would have thought they would have known each other for ages. When dessert is finished, a few minutes before the 2 o'clock in the morning, Chandrash stands and clears his throat. If you would all be so kind as to join me in the study for coffee and brandy, we may get down to business, he says. He nods at Marco, who slips away, rejoining them upstairs in the study, with several large notebooks and rolls of paper in hand. Coffees and brandies are poured, and the guests settle on various couches and armchairs around a crackling fireplace. After lighting a cigar, Chandrish begins his speech, punctuating it with purposely placed puffs of smoke. Your company has been requested this evening because I have a project I am beginning. An endeavor, you might say. I do believe it is an endeavor that will appeal to all of you, and that you may each, in your own unique ways, aid in the planning. Your assistance, which is both entirely voluntary, will be both appreciated and compensated. Stop beating around the bush and tell us what your new game is, Chandresh, darling, Madame Padma says, swirling her brandy. Some of us aren't getting any younger. One of the Burgess sisters stifles a giggle. But of course, Tante Padma, Chandrish bows in her direction. My new game, as you so appropriately call it, is a circus. A circus, says Lady Burgess with a smile. How marvelous! Like a carnival? Mr. Barris asks, sounding mildly confused. More than a carnival, Chandrish says. More than a circus, really. Like no circus anyone has ever seen. Not a single large tent, but a multitude of tents, each with a particular exhibition. No elephants or clowns. No. Something more refined than that. Nothing commonplace. This will be different. This will be an utterly unique experience. A feast for the senses. Theatric sans theater. An immersive entertainment. We will destroy the presumptuous and preconceived notions of what a circus is and make something else entirely. Something new. He gestures to Marco, who spreads out the rolls of paper on the table, holding down the corners with an assortment of paperweights and oddities. A monkey skull, a butterfly suspended in glass. The plans are predominantly sketches surrounded by notes. They show only fragments of an idea. A ring of tents, a central promenade. Lists of possible attractions or acts are scrawled down the sides, some crossed out or circled. Fortune teller, acrobats, conjurer, contortionists, dancers, fire artists. The Burgess sisters and Mr. Barris pore over the sketches, reading each note as Chandrish continues. Madame Padma smiles, but remains seated, sipping her brandy. Mr. A.H. does not move, his expression inscrutable and unchanged. It is merely in the conceptual stages, and that is why I ask you all here now for the inception and development. What this needs is style, panache, ingenuity in its engineering and structure, to be infused with the mesmerizing and perhaps a touch of mystery. I believe you are the proper group for this undertaking. If any of you disagree, you are welcome to leave, but I respectfully request you speak of this to no one. I prefer that these plans are kept undisclosed entirely, at least for now. Very sensitive at this point, after all. He takes a long draw off his cigar, blowing out the smoke slowly before he concludes. If we do this properly, it will undoubtedly take on a life of its own. There is silence when he finishes. Only the crackle of the fire fills the room, and for several moments the guests look from one to the other, each waiting for someone to respond. "Might I have a pencil?" Mr. Barris asks. Marco hands him one, and Mr. Barris begins drawing, taking the rudimentary sketch of the circus's layout and developing it into a complex design. Chandra's guests remain there until just before dawn, and when they do finally depart, there are 3 times the number of diagrams and plans and notes than there had been when they arrived, strewn and pinned around the study like maps to an unknown treasure. Condolences, New York, March 1885. The announcement in the paper states that Hector Bowen, better known as Prospero the Enchanter, entertainer and stage magician of great renown, died of heart failure in his home on the 15th of March. It goes on about his work and his legacy for some time. The age listed is erroneous, a detail few readers perceive. A short paragraph at the end of the obituary mentions that he is survived by a daughter of 17 years of age, a Miss Celia Bowen. This number is more accurate. There is also a notice that though funeral services will be private, condolences may be sent via the address of one of the local theaters. The cards and letters are collected, placed in bags, and brought by messenger to the Bowens' private residence, a townhouse that is already overflowing with appropriately somber floral arrangements. The scent of lilies is stifling, and when Celia can no longer tolerate it, she transforms all the flowers into roses. Celia leaves the condolences piled on the dining room table until they begin to overflow into the lounge. She does not want to deal with them, but she cannot bring herself to toss them away unread. When she is unable to avoid the matter further, she makes a pot of tea and begins to tackle the mountain of paper. She opens each piece of mail one by one and sorts them into piles. There are postmarks from around the globe. There are long, earnest letters filled with genuine despair. There are empty well-wishes and hollow praises of her father's talents. Many of them comment that the senders were unaware that the great Prospero had a daughter. Others remember her fondly, describing a delightful, tiny girl that Celia herself does not recall being. A few include disturbingly worded marriage proposals. Those in particular Celia crumples into balls, placing the crushed missives on her open palm one by one and concentrating until they burst into flame, leaving nothing but cinders on her hand that she brushes away into nothingness. "I am already married," she remarks to the empty air, twisting the ring on her right hand that covers an old, distinctive scar. Amongst the letters and cards, there is a plain gray envelope. Celia pulls it from the pile, slicing it open with a silver letter opener, ready to throw it onto the pile like the rest. But this envelope, unlike the others, is addressed to her father proper, though the postmark is after his date of death. The card inside is not a note of sympathy, nor a condolence for her loss. It contains no greeting, no signature. The handwritten words across the paper read, "Your move," and nothing more. Celia turns the card over, but the reverse is blank. Not even a stationer's imprint marring the surface. There is no return address upon the envelope. She reads the two words on the gray paper several times. She cannot tell if the feeling creeping up her spine is excitement or dread. Abandoning the remaining condolences, Celia takes the card in hand and leaves the room, ascending a winding stair that leads to the upstairs parlor. She pulls a ring of keys from her pocket and impatiently unlocks 3 separate locks in order to access the room that is drenched in bright afternoon sun. "What is this about?" Celia says, holding the card out in front of her as she enters. The figure hovering by the window turns. Where the sunlight hits him, he is all but invisible. Parts of his shoulder appear to be missing. The top of his head vanishes in a flutter of sun-caught dust. The rest of him is transparent, like a reflection in glass. What is left of Hector Bowen reads the note and laughs delightedly. The Contortionist's Tattoo, London, September 1885. Approximately once a month, there are not quite regularly scheduled midnight dinners that are most often referred to by the guests as circus dinners. They are a nocturnal amalgam of social event and business meeting. Madame Padva is always in attendance, and one or both Burgess sisters are a staple. Mr. Barris joins them as often as his schedule will allow, as he travels quite a bit and is not as flexible as he would prefer. Mr. A.H. appears rarely. Tara remarks that they seem to have more productive post-dinner meetings when he is there, though he only offers occasional suggestions as to how the circus itself should be regulated. On this particular evening, only the ladies are present. "Where is our Mr. Barris this evening?" Madame Padva inquires after the Burgess sisters arrive on their own, since he commonly accompanies them. "He's in Germany," Lainey and Tara chorus in perfect unison, making Chandra's laugh as he hands them their glasses of wine. "He's tracking down a clockmaker," Lainey continues solo. "Something about commissioning a piece for the circus. He was quite enthused about it before he left." Tonight's dinner has no scheduled entertainment, not even the standard piano accompaniment, but entertainment arrives unannounced at the door nonetheless. She gives her name as Tsukiko, though she does not clarify if it is her first or last name. She is small, but not tiny. Long midnight black hair is artfully knotted in elaborate braids upon her head. She wears a dark coat that is too large for her, but carries herself in such a way that it seems to hang like a cloak, and the effect is rather elegant. Marco leaves her in the foyer, waiting patiently beneath the looming gold elephant-headed statue, while he attempts to explain the situation to Chandrash, which, of course, results in the entire dinner company filing out into the hall to see what the fuss is about. What brings you here at this hour? Chandrash asks, perplexed. Stranger things have happened at La Maison Lefebvre than unexpected entertainment, and the pianist does sometimes send a replacement when she is unavailable for a dinner. I have always been nocturnal, is Tsukiko's only response, and she does not elaborate as to what twists of fate brought her to this spot at this time. And the smile that accompanies her cryptic sentiment is warm and contagious. The Burgess sisters beg Chandrash to let her stay. We are about to sit down to dinner, Chandrash says with a frown, but you are welcome to join us in the dining room to do whatever it is you do. Tsukiko bows and the smile appears again. While the rest of them file into the dining room, Marco takes her coat, hesitating when he sees what lies beneath it. She wears a thin wisp of a gown that would likely be considered scandalous in any other company, but this gathering is not easily scandalized. It is more a delicate swab of red silk held in place by a tightly laced corset than a proper dress. And it is not the relative insubstantiality of her clothing that causes Marco to stare, but the tattoo that snakes across her skin. At first, it is difficult to discern what it is. The shower of black marks that curl around her shoulders and neck, ending just above her cleavage in the front, and disappearing behind the laces of her corset in the back. It is impossible to tell how far beyond the tattoo travels. And upon a closer look, it can be discerned that the swirl of the tattoo is more than simple black marks. It is a flowing waterfall of alchemical and astrological symbols, ancient marks for planets and elements all emblazoned in black ink upon her fair skin. Mercury, lead, antimony. A crescent moon sits at the nape of her neck, an Egyptian ankh near her collarbone. There are other symbols as well, Norse runes, Chinese characters. There are countless tattoos, and yet they meld and flow into one design, gracefully adorning her like an elegant, unusual piece of jewelry. Tsukiko catches Marco staring, and though he does not inquire about it, she says quietly, "It is a part of who I was, who I am, and who I will be." And then she smiles and heads into the dining room, leaving Marco alone in the hall just as the clock begins chiming midnight and the first course is served. She slips off her shoes by the doorway and walks barefoot to the area near the piano that is catching the best light from the candelabras and the chandeliers. At first, she simply stands, relaxed and calm, while the diners regard her curiously, and then it becomes immediately clear what her style of entertainment is. Tsukiko is a contortionist. Traditionally, contortionists are either front-bending or back-bending, depending on the flexibility of their respective spines, and their tricks and performances are based upon this distinction. Tsukiko, however, is one of the rare contortionists whose flexibility is equal in both directions. She moves with the grace of a trained ballerina, a detail Madame Padva notes and mentions in a whisper to the Burgess sisters, even before the more impressive feats of agility begin. "Could you do such things when you were a dancer?" Tara asks her, as Tsukiko pulls a leg up impossibly far over her head. "I would have had a much busier social calendar if I could," Madame Padva replies with a shake of her head. Tsukiko is a consummate performer. She adds the perfect flourishes, holds positions and pauses for the ideal amount of time. Although she twists her body into unimaginable and painful-looking positions, her beatific smile remains in place. Her modest audience forgets their conversation and dinner as they watch. Lainey remarks to her sister after the fact that she was certain there was music, though there was no sound at all, save for the rustle of silk against skin and the crackle from the fireplace. "This is what I've been talking about," Chandra says, hitting the table with his fist, suddenly breaking the charmed silence. Tara nearly drops the fork that she had been holding idly in her hand, catching it before it clatters onto her plate of half-eaten vermouth poached oysters, but Tsukiko continues her graceful motions unfazed, though her smile increases noticeably. "This?" Madame Padma asks. "This," Chandras repeats, waving at Tsukiko. "This is the precise flavor that the circus should be. Unusual yet beautiful. Provocative while remaining elegant. This is kismet, her coming here tonight. We simply have to have her. I will accept nothing less. Marco, get this lady a chair." A place is set for Tsukiko. Her smile is bemused when she joins them at the table. The conversation that follows involves more creative coercion than outright job offer, and there are several deviations into the subject of the ballet, modern fashion, and Japanese mythology. After 5 courses and a great deal of wine, Tsukiko allows herself to be persuaded to accept an invitation to perform in a not yet existent circus. "Well then," Chandra says, "we are set as far as contortionists go. That's a start." "Shouldn't there be more than one?" Lainey asks. "An entire tent like one for the acrobats?" "Nonsense," Chandresh replies. "Better to have a single perfect diamond than a sack of flawed stones. We'll make a showcase of her, putting her in the courtyard or something." The matter is considered settled for the moment, and throughout dessert and after-dinner drinks, the only subject discussed is the circus itself. Tsukiko leaves a card providing information as to how to contact her with Marco before she departs, and she soon becomes a fixture at the circus dinners, often performing before or after dinner, so as not to distract the guests during the meal. She remains Chandra's favorite, oft-referred criterion for what the circus should be. Horology, Munich, 1885. Herr Friedrich Thiessen receives an unexpected visitor in his Munich workshop, an Englishman by the name of Mr. Ethan Barris. Mr. Barris admits that he has been attempting to track him down for some time, after admiring several Thiessen-crafted cuckoo clocks, and was pointed in the right direction by a local shopkeeper. Mr. Barris inquires as to whether Herr Thiessen would be interested in making a special commissioned piece. Herr Thiessen has had a constant stream of custom work and tells Mr. Barris as much, indicating a shelf of variants on the traditional cuckoo clock that range from the simple to the ornate. "I'm not certain you understand, Herr Thiessen," Mr. Barris says. "This would be a showcase piece, a curiosity. Your clocks are impressive, but what I am requesting would be something truly outstanding. Das Meisterwerk. And money is absolutely no object." Intrigued now, Herr Thiessen asks for specifications and details. He is given very little. Some constraints as to size, but still rather large, and is to be painted solely in black and white and shades of gray. Beyond that, the construction and embellishment is up to him. Artistic license, Mr. Barris says. Dreamlike is the only descriptive word he uses specifically. Herr Thiessen agrees, and the men shake hands. Mr. Barris says he will be in touch, and a few days later an envelope is delivered containing an excessive amount of money, a requested date of completion some months away, and an address in London for the completed clock to be shipped to. It takes the better part of those months for Herr Thiessen to complete the clock. He works on little else, though the sum of money involved makes that arrangement more than manageable. Weeks are spent on the design and mechanics. He hires an assistant to complete some of the basic woodwork, but he takes care of all the details himself. Herr Thiessen loves details, and he loves a challenge. He balances the entire design on that one specific word Mr. Barris used: dreamlike. The finished clock is resplendent. At first glance, it is simply a clock. A rather large black clock with a white face and a silver pendulum. Well crafted, obviously, with intricately carved woodwork details and a perfectly painted face. But just a clock. But that is before it is wound. And before it begins to tick, the pendulum swings steadily and evenly. Then it becomes something else. The changes are slow. First, the color changes in the face, shifting from white to gray, and then there are clouds that float across it, disappearing when they reach the opposite side. Meanwhile, bits of the body of the clock expand and contract, like pieces of a puzzle, as though the clock is falling apart, slowly and gracefully. All of this takes hours. The face of the clock becomes a darker gray, then black, with twinkling stars where the numbers had been previously. The body of the clock, which had been methodically turning itself inside out and expanding, is now entirely subtle shades of white and gray. And it is not just pieces. It is figures and objects, perfectly carved flowers and planets, and tiny books with actual paper pages that turn. There is a silver dragon that curls around part of the now visible clockwork. A tiny princess in a carved tower paces in distress, awaiting an absent prince. Teapots that pour into teacups, and minuscule curls of steam that rise from them as the seconds tick. Wrapped presents open. Small cats chase small dogs. An entire game of chess is played. At the center, where a cuckoo bird would live in a more traditional timepiece, is the juggler. Dressed in Harlequin style with a gray mask, he juggles shiny silver balls that correspond to each hour. As the clock chimes, another ball joins the rest until at midnight he juggles 12 balls in a complex pattern. After midnight, the clock begins once more to fold in upon itself. The face lightens and the clouds return. The number of juggled balls decreases until the juggler himself vanishes. By noon, it is a clock again, and no longer a dream. A few weeks after it is shipped, he receives a letter from Mr. Barris, offering his sincere thanks and marveling at the ingenuity of it. It is perfection, he writes. The letter is accompanied by another exorbitant amount of money, enough for Herr Thiessen to retire comfortably if he wish. He does not, and continues to make his clocks in his Munich workshop. He thinks no more of it, other than a passing thought of how the clock itself might be doing, and where it might be, though he assumes incorrectly that it remains in London, particularly when he is working on a clock that reminds him of the Wunschtraum clock. which is how he referred to it during the more troublesome parts of the construction, uncertain whether or not it was a dream that could be realized. He does not hear from Mr. Barris beyond that single letter. Auditory, London, April 1886. There is still an unprecedented gathering of illusionists in the lobby of the theater. A gaggle of pristine suits and strategically placed silk handkerchiefs. Some have trunks and capes. Others carry bird cages or silver-topped canes. They do not speak to each other as they wait to be called in, one at a time, referenced not by name, given or stage, but by a number written on a small slip of paper given to them upon arrival. Instead of chit-chatting or gossiping or sharing tricks of the trade, they shift in their seats and cast rather conspicuous glances at the girl. A few mistook her for an assistant when they arrived, but she sits waiting in her chair with her own numbered slip of paper, 23. She has no trunk, no cape, no birdcage or cane. She is dressed in a deep green gown with a black puffed sleeve jacket buttoned over it. A pile of brown curls is pinned neatly upon her head under a tiny and feathered but otherwise unremarkable black hat. Her face maintains a semblance of girlishness in the length of her eyelashes and the slight pout of her lips, despite the fact that she is clearly too old to be properly called a girl. But it is difficult to discern her age, and no one dares inquire. The others think of her as the girl regardless, and refer to her as such when they discuss the affair after the fact. She acknowledges no one, despite the barely concealed glances and occasional outright stare. One by one, each illusionist's number is called by a man with a list and a notebook, who escorts them through a gilded door on the side of the lobby, and, one by one, each returns to the lobby and exits the theater. Some last only minutes, while others remain in the theater for quite some time. Those with higher numbers shift impatiently in their seats, as they wait for the man with the notebook to reappear and politely call out their number on the respective slips of paper. The last illusionist to enter the gilded door, a rotund fellow with a top hat and flashy cape, returns to the lobby rather quickly and visibly agitated, flouncing through the exit back onto the street, letting the theater door slam shut behind him. The sound is still echoing through the lobby when the man with the notebook reappears, nods absently at the room, and clears his throat. Number 23, Marco says, checking the number on his list. All eyes in the room turn as the girl rises from her seat and steps forward. Marco watches her approach, confused at first, but then the confusion is replaced by something else entirely. He could tell from across the room that she was lovely, but when she is near enough to look him in the eyes, the loveliness, the shape of her face, the contrast of her hair against her skin, evolves into something more. She is radiant. For a moment, while they look at each other, he cannot remember what he is meant to be doing, or why she is handing him a piece of paper with the number 23 written on it in his own handwriting. "This way, please," he manages to say as he takes her number and holds the door open for her. She bobs the slightest of curtsies in acknowledgement, and the lobby is abuzz with whispers before the door has fully closed behind them. The theater is massive and ornate, with rows upon rows of plush red velvet seats. Orchestra, mezzanine, and balcony spreading out from the empty stage in a cascade of crimson. It is empty, save for two people seated approximately 10 rows back from the stage. Chandrash, Chandrash Christopher Lefebvre sits with his feet propped up on the seat in front of him. Madame Anna Padva sits to his right, pulling a watch from her bag while she stifles a yawn. Marco emerges from the wings of the stage with the girl in the green dress trailing close behind him. He gestures for her to move to the center of the stage, unable to take his eyes from her as he announces her to the mostly empty theater. Number 23, he says, before descending a small set of stairs near the proscenium and hovering by the edge of the front row, pen poised over his open notebook. Madame Padva looks up and smiles, tucking her watch back into her bag. "What's this, then?" Chandrash asks, not directing the question to anyone in particular. The girl does not respond. "This is number 23, Marco repeats, checking his notes to make certain the odd number is correct. "We're auditioning illusionists, my dear girl," Chandrash says rather loudly, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "Magicians, conjurers, etc. No need for lovely assistance at this time." "I am an illusionist," the girl says. Her voice is calm and low. "I am here for your audition." "I see," Chandrash says, frowning as he looks the girl over slowly from head to toe. She stands perfectly still in the center of the stage, patiently, as though she has expected such a reaction. "Is there something wrong with that?" Madame Padva asks. "I am not entirely sure it is appropriate," Chandrash says, eyeing the girl thoughtfully. "After all your pontificating about the contortionist?" Chandrash pauses, still looking at the girl on the stage who, while comparatively elegant, does not appear particularly unusual. "That's a different matter," is all he can manage to his reasoning. "Really, Chandrash," Madame Padva says, "we should at least let her show off her skills before arguing over the appropriateness of a female illusion." "But she has so much more sleeve to hide things up," he protests. In response, the girl unbuttons her puffed sleeve jacket and drops it unceremoniously on the stage by her feet. Her green gown is both sleeveless and strapless, leaving her shoulders and arms completely bare, save for the long silver chain with what appears to be a silver locket around her neck. She then removes her gloves and tosses them, one by one, on the crumpled jacket as well. Madame Padva gives Chandrash a pointed look that is met with a sigh. "Hello, and welcome. Thank you for the raid." "Very well," Chandrash says. "On with it." He gestures vaguely at Marco. "Yes, sir," Marco says, turning to address the girl. "We have a few preliminary questions before the practical demonstration. Your name, miss?" "Celia Bowen." Marco records this in his notebook. "And your stage name?" he says. "I don't have a stage name," Celia says. Marco knows this as well. "Where have you performed professionally?" "I have never performed professionally before." At this, Chandrash moves to interrupt, but Madame Padva stops him. "Then, with whom have you studied?" Marco asks. "With my father, Hector Bowen," Celia answers. She pauses for a moment before adding, "Though perhaps he is better known as Prospero the Enchanter." Marco drops his pen. "Prospero the Enchanter." Chandrash removes his feet from the chair in front of him and leans forward, staring at Celia as though he is seeing a completely different person. "Your father is Prospero the Enchanter." "Was," Celia clarifies. "He passed last year." "I'm sorry for your loss, dear," Madame Padva says. But who, pray tell, is Prospero the Enchanter? Only the greatest illusionist of his generation, Chandrash says. Used to book him whenever I could get my hands on him years ago now. Absolutely brilliant, completely mesmerized every audience. Never seen anyone to match him. Never. He would have been pleased to hear that, sir, Celia says, her eyes briefly glancing over to the shadowed curtains on the side of the stage. I told him as much, though I haven't seen him in ages. Got very drunk with him in a pub some years back, and he went on about pushing the boundaries of what theater can be, inventing something more extraordinary. He probably would have loved this entire endeavor. Damn shame. He sighs heavily, shaking his head. Well, on with it then, he says, leaning back in his seat and regarding Celia with a considerable amount of interest. Marco, pen in hand, once more, returns to his list of questions. Are you capable of performing without a stage? Yes, Celia says. Can your illusions be viewed from all angles? Celia smiles. You are looking for someone who can perform in the midst of a crowd? She asks Chandrash. He nods. I see, Celia says. Then, so swiftly she appears not even to move, she picks up her jacket from the stage and flings it out over the seats, where instead of tumbling down, it swoops up, folding into itself. In the blink of an eye, folds of silk are glossy black feathers, large beating wings, and it is impossible to pinpoint the moment when it is fully raven and no longer cloth. The raven swoops over the red velvet seats and up into the balcony, where it flies in curious circles. Impressive, Mademoiselle Padva says. Unless she had him concealed in those gigantic sleeves, Chandrash mutters. On stage, Celia crosses closer to Marco. May I borrow that for a moment? She asks him, indicating his notebook. He hesitates before handing it to her. Thank you, she says, returning to the center of the stage. She barely glances at the list of questions in precise handwriting before tossing the notebook straight up into the air, where it turns end over end, and the blur of fluttering paper becomes a white dove flapping its wings and taking flight in a loop around the theater. The raven caws at it from its perch in the balcony. Ha! Chandrash exclaims, both at the dove and the expression on Marco's face. The dove swoops back down to Celia, settling gently on her outstretched hand. She strokes its wing and then releases it back into the air. It lifts only a few feet above her head before wings are paper once again, and it topples quickly down. Celia catches it with one hand and gives it back to Marco, whose complexion is now a few shades paler. Thank you, Celia says with a smile. Marco nods absently, not meeting her eyes, and quickly retreats to his corner. Marvelous, simply marvelous, Chandrash says. This could work. This could most definitely work. He rises from his seat and moves down the aisle, stopping to pace thoughtfully in front of the orchestra pit by the footlights. There is a matter of costuming her, Madame Padva calls to him from her seat. I had only considered formal suits. A similar sort of gown might do just as well, I suppose. What manner of costume do you require? Celia asks. We have a color scheme to work with, dear, Madame Padva says. Or a lack thereof. Nothing but black and white. Though on you a full black gown might be a bit too funereal. I see, says Celia. Madame Padva stands and moves down the aisle where Chandrash is pacing. She whispers something in his ear and turns in to consult with her, taking his eyes off Celia for a moment. No one is watching her, except Marco, as she stands perfectly still on stage, waiting patiently. And then, very slowly, her gown begins to change. Starting at the neckline and seeping down like ink, the green silk is turning a murky, midnight black. Marco gasps. Chandrash and Madame Padva turn at the sound just to witness the creeping black fade into snow-bright white at the bottom of the skirt, until all evidence that the gown was evergreen is gone. Well, that makes my job easier, Madame Padva says, though she cannot conceal the delight in her eyes. Though I think perhaps your hair is too light a shade. Celia shakes her head, and her brown curls deepen in hue to a near black, as glossy and ebony as the wings of her raven. Marvelous, Chandrash says, almost to himself. Celia simply smiles. Chandrash leaps up to the stage, taking the small flight of stairs in only 2 steps. He inspects Celia's gown from every angle. May I? He asks before carefully touching the fabric of her skirt. Celia nods. The silk is undeniably black and white, the transition between the two a soft fade of gray, distinct fibers visible in the weave. What happened to your father, if you don't mind me prying? Chandrash asks, his attention still on her gown. I do not mind, Celia says. One of his tricks did not go entirely to plan. That's a damned shame, he says, stepping back. Miss Bowen, might you be interested in a somewhat unique employment opportunity? He snaps his fingers, and Marco approaches with his notebook, halting a few paces away from Celia, his stare moving from her gown to her hair and back, spending a considerable amount of time in between. Before she can respond, a caw echoes from the theater, from the raven still perched on the balcony, watching the scene in front of him curiously. Just a moment, Celia says. She lifts her hand in a delicate gesture at the raven. In response, it caws again and spreads its large wings, taking flight and swooping towards the stage, gaining speed as it approaches. Descending quickly, it dives, flying directly at Celia and not wavering or slowing as it reaches the stage, but approaching at full speed. Chandrash jumps back with a start, almost falling over Marco as the raven crashes into Celia in a flurry of feathers. And then it is gone. Not a single feather remains, and Celia is once again wearing a puffed-sleeve black jacket, already buttoned over her black and white gown. In the front of the orchestra, Madame Padma claps. Celia bows, taking the opportunity to retrieve her gloves from the floor. She's perfect, Chandrash remarks, pulling a cigar from his pocket. Absolutely perfect. Yes, sir, says Marco behind him, the notebook in his hands, shaking slightly. The illusionists waiting in the lobby grumble when they are thanked for their time and politely dismissed. Stratogen, London, April 1886. She's too good to keep out in the crowd, Chandrash says. She simply must have her own tent. We'll put the seats in a ring or something. Keep the audience right in the middle of the action. Yes, sir, Marco says, fiddling with his notebook, running his fingers over the pages that had been wings only minutes before. Whatever is the matter with you? Chandrash asks. You're white as a sheet. His voice echoes through the empty theater as they stand alone on the stage. Madame Padma having whisked Miss Bowen off, peppering her with questions about gowns and hairstyles. I am fine, sir, Marco says. You look awful, Chandra says, puffing on his cigar. Go home. Marco looks up at him, surprised. Sir, there is paperwork that needs to be done, he protests. Do it tomorrow. Plenty of time for such things. Tante Padma and I will take Miss Bowen back to the house for tea, and we can sort out the particulars and paperwork later. Go have a rest, or have yourself a drink, or whatever it is you do. Chandris waves a hand at him absently, the smoke from his cigar trailing in bobbing waves. If you insist, sir. I do insist, and get rid of the rest of the fellows in the lobby. No need to see a bunch of suits with capes when we've already found something far more interesting. Quite attractive too, I should think, if one's predilection runs in that direction. Indeed, sir, Marco says, a blush creeping into his pallor. Until tomorrow, then. He turns his head in something almost like a bow, before turning gracefully on his heel and headed out into the lobby. Didn't take you to be the easily spooked type, Marco, Chandrish calls after him. But Marco does not turn. Marco politely dismisses the illusionists in the lobby, explaining that the position has been filled and thanking them for their time. None of them notice that his hands are shaking, or that he is clutching the pen in his hand so tightly that his knuckles are white. Nor do they notice when it snaps in two within his fist, black ink seeping down his wrist. After the illusionists have departed, Marco gathers his things, wiping his ink-covered hand on his black coat. He puts his bowler hat on before he exits the theater. With every step, he grows visibly distressed. People move out of his way on the crowded pavement. When he reaches his flat, Marco drops his bag to the floor, leaning against the door with a heavy sigh. What's wrong? Isabel asks from the chair next to the empty fireplace. She conceals the length of hair she has been braiding in her pocket, scowling as she knows she will have to rebraid the entire piece because her concentration is broken. It is the part that she still has the most difficulty with, the concentration and the focus. For now, she abandons it and watches Marco as he crosses the room to reach the bookcases lining the walls. I know who my opponent is, Marco says, pulling armfuls of books from their shelves and spreading them out haphazardly on the tables, leaving several in messy piles on the floor. Those remaining on the shelves collapse, a few volumes falling, but Marco does not seem to notice. Is it that Japanese woman you were so curious about? Isabel asks, watching as Marco's impeccable filing system falls into chaos. The flat has always been kept in perfect order, and she finds the sudden upheaval disquieting. No, Marco says as he flips through the pages. It's Prospero's daughter. Isabel picks up a potted violet that has toppled in the wake of the falling books and places it back upon the shelf. Prospero? She asks. The magician? The one you saw in Paris? Marco nods. I didn't know he had a daughter, she says. I was unaware of that fact myself, Marco says, discarding one book and picking up another. Chandra's just hired her to be the illusionist for the circus. Really? Isabel asks. Marco does not respond. So she'll be doing what you said he did, actual magic disguised as stage illusions. Did she do that in the audition? Yes, she did, Marco says, without looking up from his books. She must be very good. She's too good, Marco says, pulling another shelf worth of books from their resting places and moving them to the table. The violet, an innocent victim once more. This could be extremely problematic, he says, almost to himself. A pile of notebooks slips from the table to the floor in a flurry of fluttering pages and a sound like the wings of birds. Isabel retrieves the violet again, placing it across the room. Does she know who you are? She asks. I do not believe so, Marco says. Does this mean the circus is part of the challenge? Isabel asks. Marco stops flipping through pages and looks up at her. It must, he says before he returns his attention to the book. That's likely why I was sent to work for Chandra, so I would already be involved. The circus is the venue. Is that good? Isabel asks, but Marco does not answer, lost in the flood of paper and ink again. With one hand he fidgets with the cloth of the other sleeve. A splatter of black ink stains the white cuff. She changed the fabric, he mutters to himself. How did she change the fabric? Isabel moves the pile of abandoned books to the desk, where her Marseille deck rests. She looks up at Marco, who is now deeply engrossed in a particular volume. She quietly spreads the cards in a long line across the desk. Keeping her eyes on Marco, she draws a single card. She flips it over on the desk and looks down to see what her cards have to say about the matter. A man stands between two women, a cherub with a bow and arrow hovering over their heads. L'amoureux, the lovers. Is she pretty? Isabel asks. Marco does not answer. She pulls another card from the line and lays it on top of the first. La maison du. She frowns at the picture of the crumbling tower and the falling figure. She returns both cards to the deck, pushing it back into an orderly stack. Is she stronger than you? Isabel asks. Again, Marco fails to answer, flipping through the pages of the notebook. For years, he has felt reasonably well prepared. Practicing with Isabel has proved an advantage, enabling him to improve aspects of his illusions to the point where even with her familiarity, she cannot always discern what is real. But faced with his opponent, his feelings about the challenge have suddenly changed, replaced by nerves and confusion. He half expected that he would simply know what to do when the time came, and he had entertained the thought that the time might never come, that the promise of the game was something to motivate his studies and nothing more. So, the competition will begin when the circus opens, then? Isabel asks him. He had almost forgotten she was there. I suppose that would be logical, Marco says. I don't understand how we are meant to compete when the circus is going to travel and I must remain in London. I shall have to do everything remotely. I could go, Isabel says. What? Marco says, looking up at her again. You said the circus still needs a fortune teller, didn't you? I could read my cards. I haven't read for anyone but myself, but I am getting better at it. I could write you letters when the circus is away. It would give me someplace to go if you're not supposed to have me here while you play your game. I'm not sure that's a good idea, Marco says, though he cannot articulate why. He had never considered the possibility of involving Isabel in his life outside the bounds of the flat. He had been keeping her separate from Chandrash and the circus, both to have something of his own and because it seemed appropriate,
I know it sounds silly,
especially given his master's vague instruction about the matter. Please, Isabel says. This way I can help you. Marco hesitates, glancing down at his books. His thoughts remain preoccupied with the image of the girl from the theater. It will help you be closer to the circus, Isabel continues, and it will give me something to do for the duration of your challenge. When it's done, I can come back to London. I'm not even certain how the challenge is going to work, Marco says. But you're certain I can't stay here during it? She asks. Thank you for the subscribe rep. My goodness, at a tier 3, that's a little bit nutty. Oh dear, I've lost my place. Marco sighs. They have discussed it before, not in any great detail, but enough to establish that when the game began, she would have to leave. I am already so busy working for Chandrash, and I will need to focus on the competition without distraction, he says, using his instructor's choice of word, from an order disguised as a suggestion. He is not certain which he is not certain which option bothers him more, involving Isabel in the game, or relinquishing the one relationship in his life that has not been dictated for him. This way I wouldn't be a distraction, I'd be helping, Isabel says. And if you're not supposed to have help, well, I'd only be writing you letters. What's wrong with that? It seems like a perfect solution to me. I could arrange for you to meet with Chandrash, Marco suggests. You could convince him to hire me, couldn't you? Isabel asks. If he needs convincing? Marco nods, still not entirely certain about the idea, but almost desperate for a new kind of strategy, a tactic to use in dealing with his newly revealed opponent. He turns her name over and over in his mind. What is Prospero's daughter named? Isabel says, as though she can tell what he is thinking. Bowen, Marco says. Her name is Celia Bowen. It's a pretty name, Isabel says. Is something wrong with your hand? Marco looks down, surprised to find that he has been holding his right hand in his left, unconsciously stroking the empty space where a ring was once burned into his skin. No, he says, picking up an empty notebook to occupy his hands. It's nothing. Isabel seems satisfied with the response, lifting a pile of fallen books from the floor and stacking them on the desk. Marco is relieved that she does not have the skill to pull the memory of the ring from his mind. Fire and light. You step into a bright, open courtyard surrounded by striped tents. Curving pathways along the perimeter lead away from the courtyard, turning into unseen mysteries dotted with twinkling lights. There are vendors traversing the crowd around you, selling refreshments and oddities, creations flavored with vanilla and honey, chocolate and cinnamon. A contortionist in a sparkling black costume twists on a platform nearby, bending her body into impossible shapes. A juggler tosses globes of black and white and silver high into the air, where they seem to hover before falling again into his hands, his attentive spectators applauding, all bathed in glowing light. The light emanates from a large bonfire in the center of the courtyard. As you walk closer, you can see that it sits in a wide, black cauldron, balanced on a number of clawed feet. Where the rim of a cauldron would be, it breaks into long strips of curling iron, as though it had been melted and pulled apart like taffy. The curling iron continues up until it curls back into itself, weaving in and out amongst the other curls, giving it a cage-like effect. The flames are visible in the gaps between and slightly rising above. They are obscured only at the bottom, so it is impossible to tell what is burning, if it is wood or coal or something else entirely. The flames are not yellow or orange, but white as snow as they dance. Hidden Things. Concord, Massachusetts, October 1902. The arguments over Bailey's future began early and occur frequently, though at this point they often devolve into repetitive phrases and tense silences. He blames Caroline for starting it, even though the raising of the issue was the fault of his maternal grandmother. Bailey is much more fond of his grandmother than of his sister, so he leaves the blame squarely on Caroline. Had she not given in, he would not have had to fight as hard. It was one of their grandmother's requests disguised as a suggestion, which seemed innocuous enough, that Caroline attend Radcliffe College. Caroline seemed intrigued by the idea of through the entire length of tea in the cushioned flower wallpapered calm of their grandmother's Cambridge parlor. But any resolve she might have had about the matter disappeared as soon as they were back in Concord and their father's word came down. Absolutely not. Caroline accepted this with little more than a fleeting pout, decided it would probably be too much work, and that she did not particularly care for the city anyway. Besides, Millie was engaged and there was a wedding to plan, a subject Caroline found far more interesting than her own education. And that was that. Then came the response from Cambridge, the grandmotherly decree that this was acceptable. But Bailey would be going to Harvard, of course. This one was not a request disguised as anything. This was pure demand. Finance-based protestations were crushed before they could be raised by the clear statement that his tuition would be taken care of. The argument started before Bailey's opinion was even asked. "I would like to go," he said, when there came a pause long enough to fit the words in. "You are taking over the farm," was his father's response. The easy thing to do would be to let the issue drop and raise it again later, especially considering Bailey is not quite 16 and there is a substantial interim before either option will occur. Instead, and he is not entirely certain why, he keeps the subject alive, bringing it up as often as possible, pointing out that he could always go and return to the farm after the fact, that 4 years is not a terribly long time. These statements are met with lectures at first, but they soon become loudly voiced decrees and slammed doors. His mother stays out of the arguments as much as she can, but when pressed, she agrees with her husband, while at the same time quietly asserting it really should be Bailey's decision. Bailey is not even certain he wants to go to Harvard. He does like the city more than Caroline, and it seems to him to be the option that holds the most mystery, the most possibility. Whereas the farm holds only sheep and apples and predictability. He can already envision how it will play out. Every day, every season. When the apples will fall, and when the sheep will need shearing, and when the frost will come. Always the same, year after year. He mentioned something about the endless repetition to his mother, hoping it might turn into a more measured conversation about whether or not he will be able to be allowed to leave, but she only says that she finds the cyclical nature of the farm comforting, and asks if he has finished all his chores. The invitations to tea in Cambridge now arrive addressed only to Bailey, leaving his sister off entirely. Caroline mutters something about not having time for such things anyway, and Bailey attends alone, grateful to be able to enjoy the trip without Caroline's constant talking. "I do not particularly care whether or not you attend Harvard," his grandmother says one afternoon, though Bailey has not mentioned it. He generally attempts to avoid the subject, thinking he knows perfectly well where she stands. He adds another spoon of sugar to his tea and waits for her to elaborate. "I believe it would afford you more opportunity," she continues. "And that is something that I would like you to have, even if your parents are not enthused by the idea. Do you know why I gave my daughter permission to marry your father?" "No," Bailey says. It is not a topic that has ever been discussed in his presence, but Caroline once told him in secret she heard it was something of a scandal. Even almost 20 years later, his father never sets foot in his grandmother's house, nor does she ever come out to Concord, because she would have run off with him, regardless, she says. That is what she wished. It would not have been my choice for her, but a child should not have their choices dictated for them. I have listened to you read books aloud to my cats. When you were 5 years old, you turned a laundry tub into a pirate ship and launched an attack against the hydrangeas in my garden. Do not try to convince me that you would choose that farm. I have a responsibility, Bailey says, repeating the word he has begun to hate. His grandmother makes a noise that may be a laugh, or a caw, or a combination of the two. Follow your dreams, Bailey, she says, be they Harvard or something else entirely. No matter what that father of yours says, or how loudly he may say it, he forgets that he was someone's dream once, himself. Hi, Atlas. Thank you for the raid. Welcome in, everyone. Bailey nods, and his grandmother sits back in her chair and complains about the neighbor for some time, not mentioning his father or his dreams again. Though, before Bailey leaves, she adds, "Do not forget what I said." "I won't," he assures her. He does not tell her that he has only one dream, and it is just as improbable as a career in garden piracy. But he valiantly continues to debate with his father on a regular basis. "Doesn't my opinion matter?" he asks one evening, before the conversation escalates to door slamming. "No, it does not," his father answers. "Maybe you should let this go, Bailey," his mother says quietly after his father leaves the room. Bailey begins spending a great deal of time outside the house. School does not take up as many hours as he would like. At first, he works more in the far rows of the orchards, choosing the farthest points from wherever his father happens to be. Then he resorts to taking long walks through fields and woods and cemeteries. He wanders past graves belonging to philosophers and poets, authors whose books he knows from his grandmother's library. And there are countless other headstones, engraved with names he does not recognize, and more that have been worn by time and wind, that they are illegible, their owners long forgotten. He walks with no particular destination in mind, but the place he ends up most frequently is the very same oak tree he so often sat in with Caroline and her friends. It is more manageable now that he is taller, and he climbs to the topmost branches with ease. It is shaded enough to feel secluded, but bright enough to read when he brings books along, which soon becomes a part of his routine. He reads histories and mythologies and fairy tales, wondering why it seems that only girls are ever swept away from their mundane lives on farms by knights or princes or wolves. It strikes him as unfair to not have the same fanciful opportunity himself, and he is not in any position to do any rescuing of his own. During the hours spent watching the sheep as they wander aimlessly around their fields, he even wishes that someone would come and take him away. But he wishes on sheep. But his wishes on sheep appear to work no better than wishes on stars. He tells himself it is not a bad life, that there is nothing wrong with being a farmer. But still, the discontent remains. Even the ground beneath his feet feels unsatisfying to his boots. So, he continues to escape to his tree. To make the tree his own, he even goes so far as to move the old wooden box in which he keeps his most valuable possessions from its standard hiding spot beneath a loose floorboard on his bed to a nook in the oak tree, of substantial indentation that is not quite a hole, but secure enough to serve the purpose. The box is fairly small, with tarnished brass hinges and clasps. It is wrapped in a scrap of burlap that does a fairly good job of keeping it protected from the elements, and it sits securely enough that it has not been dislodged by even the most resourceful squirrels. Its contents include a chipped arrowhead he found in a field when he was 5, a hole, a stone with a hole straight through it that is supposedly lucky, a black feather, a shiny rock that his mother said was some sort of quartz, a coin that was his first and never spent pocket money, a brown leather collar that belonged to the family dog who died when Bailey was 9, a solitary white glove that has gone rather gray from a combination of age and being kept in a small box with rocks, and several yellowed and folded pages filled with handwritten text. After the circus departed, he wrote down every detail he could remember about it, so it would not fade in his memory. The chocolate-covered popcorn, the tent so full of people on raised circular platforms, performing tricks with bright white fire, the magical transforming clock that sat across from the ticket booth, doing so much more than simply telling the time. While he catalogued each element of the circus in shaky handwriting, he could never manage to record his encounter with the red-haired girl. He never told anyone about her. He looked for her at the circus during his 2 subsequent visits during proper nighttime hours, but he had not been able to find her. Then the circus was gone, vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, like a fleeting dream, and it had not returned. The only proof he has now that the girl even existed and was not a figment of his imagination is the glove. But he doesn't open the box anymore. It sits firmly closed in the tree. He thinks maybe he should throw it away, but he cannot bring himself to do it. Perhaps he will leave it in the tree and let the bark grow over it, sealing it inside. It is a gray Saturday morning, and Bailey is up earlier than the rest of the family, which is not unusual. He performs his chores as quickly as possible, packs an apple in his bag along with his book, and heads off to his tree. Halfway there, he thinks perhaps he should have worn his scarf, but the day is bound to get warmer as it goes along. Concentrating on that comforting fact, he climbs up past the bottom branches he was relegated to years ago, past the branches claimed by his sister and his friends. This is Millie's branch, he thinks when his foot touches it. A feeling of satisfaction comes when he climbs above Caroline's branch, even after all this time. Surrounded by leaves that rustle in the breeze, Bailey settles into his favorite spot, his boots resting close to his almost forgotten box of treasure. When he finally looks up from his book, Bailey is so shocked by the sight of the black and white striped tent that he nearly falls out of the tree. And that, right before we get to part 2, I feel is an excellent place to stop. Thank you, everyone, for coming and spending time with me while we go back to the night circus. I hope this was comfortable and enjoyable for you as it was for me. Thank you again for the renewed subscription, Rev. Thank you again, Rev, and to Atlas for the raids. Welcome, raiders. I'm sorry that this is not as welcoming as other streams, but during Starlight Stories we tend to be a little bit quieter. This stream is used for comfort and for background noise. I will be ending here. In case there has been anyone that has used this for background noise or has fallen asleep, I will not be raiding because I don't wish to be disruptive. So I will say my farewells, and we will end here. We will be resuming again on Monday, and I look forward to seeing all of you there. Thank you so much again for spending the evening with me, and we'll see you next time, okay? Have a good night, everyone.